Hello, my name is Jesse Hill, and I do primarily Android development, but I enjoy programming in general. And recently, I have been working with Go, writing some little utilities. And as I worked more with Go, having a lot more experience in the past with Kotlin, I started noticing a couple of things about the language that I preferred how Kotlin handled it versus how Go is handling it. So I thought it would be interesting to record a short video with some of these basic examples and just to talk about it. Mostly to get my thoughts out and make sure that the feelings that I was having actually mattered, that I could express why I was liking Kotlin more than Go and be able to talk about both of them in that way. So with that, we'll jump in to the code. So I've got on the top, I've got Kotlin here in IntelliJ IDEA. And on the bottom, I've got some Go code. So full disclosure, I'm much more familiar with Kotlin than Go. And this really isn't about like the challenges that I'm doing or the programs I'm writing. It's more about seeing some patterns that start to emerge as we use the languages more and just talking about how we're feeling about those particular patterns. Everything has trade-offs. This isn't really a Kotlin is better than Go or a Go is better than Kotlin video. It's just exploring what do they both look like, what are some basic things that we're doing with them, and how does that play into things like readability, maintainability, just general ergonomics, and we're just gonna have fun with it. So I just picked like a super simple coding challenge. I think it was from HackerRank, and decided, okay, I'm gonna do this in both languages, see how it goes. No pun intended. I do say goes quite a bit, and that was prior to learning the language. So here we'll just start with Kotlin first. So it's pretty general, pretty straightforward. If you're familiar with any JVM language like Java or even JavaScript, it's not too different from like maybe TypeScript where you are actually specifying some return types and whatnot. So it's really straightforward. You define some variables, you have a loop, and you're like, okay, I'm going to iterate through the loop. I've got some conditions I'm checking, the standard plus plus, minus minus. You have some property access on the string, trying to pull out some of those characters. And then at the end, you basically just return a tuple of whatever you calculated. So pretty straightforward there, not too complicated. I do just in general like the niceties of Kotlin where you could just create a range from number to number, pretty straightforward. Pulling out the actual characters from a string is pretty straightforward. In a real world, we do some checking to make sure that this index actually existed within the string, things of that sort. But just at face value, it's pretty nice to work with. So then moving down to Go, right off the bat, it looks pretty similar. Just have different ways of formatting the types. One thing with Go is you can just return multiple things out of a function. So instead of having to, define like a pair or a triple, you can just say, here's the number of things that I'm returning and their types. So that is nice. That has some utility. That plays in when we think about error handling and how Go treats that versus Kotlin. Immediately, difference we see is we have to turn the string into a series of runes to access those runes. It's not quite as straightforward to just pull a character out of the string. I may have missed something, like I'm not as familiar with Go, but this was working. So not too bad. Go has some nice built-in functionality for doing that. So we're not really too far off there. So we just, again, define our variables. We have a for loop. Classic kind of for loop example, right? So again, not really too different than Kotlin. We can access our runes at their proper index. We have our if statements. One thing that you can do in Kotlin that is not quite as nice in Go is we can't really do these one-liners in Go, so we're expecting those brackets. But again, it's not too bad. It's not much of a difference, and there are some very interesting things you can do inside of a if statement within Go that Kotlin you can't do. And I don't think I'll get into those in the video, but just to say, like, that's a minor difference. So here, really, both languages feel mostly the same. If you're just solving some like leet codes or HackerRank or code wars, like, pick your poison. They're both going to be great. I guess that neither one is a poison in this case. Yeah, and also, like, I'm not going to really get into performance implications in this video either, just to throw that out there. So the next thing that I was going to look at, taking it one step up, is if we go to doing something a little bit more complicated and a little bit more real world. So we're going to move into doing some simple like file system stuff. I will say that Go is going to be my favorite way of interacting with a file system. So I see it replacing my use of Bash almost entirely. There's still some really simple stuff. Bash, you just can't beat it because you're already in the terminal. You might as well do that. But I think if you're just writing little file system tools that I would have done with Bash or Zeesh or something like that, now I'm going to be using Go, at least if I'm writing it like on my local machine. Anyway, so that said, we start to see a few more differences here between Kotlin and Go and just the different choices, I guess, we would make. So right off the bat, we just see differences with getting files. Like, that's fine. That's just like an API difference, right? One thing that comes out of the box very easily with Go that I liked is the ability to push how you interact with the file system into a standard library that will handle Windows versus Unix-based systems. So I have found that to be very nice. I didn't really explore that too much within the Kotlin world because mostly like I just use it for Android development or working on like a server on a Unix system. So yeah, I'm sure there's a comparable library that you could find, but having that just built in the standard library, very easy to access, was cool to see from Go. From there, we can start to see another big difference is the pattern of handling errors. And when I initially ran across this, I thought it was pretty nice that the expectation is if your code could error, you return an error. And so you would just return errors all the way up. Here, for this sake of example, I'm just like panicking, saying, okay, we're just going to crash, and this is simple enough. We want the developer to go back in and just fix it right then. But like if this was going to be user-facing or whatever, we could easily change our method signature to contain an error, and then we could even pass like custom errors back up when we encountered them, which again is a design choice that has ups and downs. So right now we could see for the Kotlin version, everything's just like wrapped in a try catch. So if anything happens, we just say, oops, your list is empty, right? And so we could do like a similar thing with Go where we log the error and just return an empty string here instead of panicking. But the main difference is just being able to have that top level everything underneath this may or may not have an issue. And so we're just going to catch anything that happens. So I'm interested to see how interacting with other libraries within Go, how this pattern of returning the errors turns out, because usually the points where you have the most issues are the integration points between yourself and the other person's code, whether it's open source or something of that nature. And so it feels like if that open source thing forgot to return an error and had a crash, your system might not be able to handle that as gracefully with Go as with Kotlin. So that was my first sort of thoughts. I haven't built anything big enough with Go for that to be a problem yet, but just trying to think through what does this look like down the road as we're using these languages to build larger and more complex systems. Okay, so the next thing that we start to see is in Go, you pretty much just have for loops. Like there's not a whole lot of just built-in support, sort of standard library support for these operator methods on things like lists, where you're able to just chain several methods together in a way that's pretty reasonable, readable. So, when I look at my last names that I have here, I can say, okay, I'm going to go top down on the file tree. I'm going to get just the name out of all of those, and I'm going to turn it into a set, right? Whereas in Go, we're like, okay, we got our last names, right? And then we're going to say, okay, well, we need to now make a set. So we have to sort of create that set, say what it's going to look like. It's basically just a map, right? And then we have to fill in that set. So it's much more, up to you to read through the code of what it's doing. Whereas in Kotlin, we sort of put that into the person naming these methods, right? So we're trusting that the person who's named this method to set is actually gonna, do it properly. And that's not too much of a different worry. For me personally, I'm finding that I prefer this a little bit more functional style programming of being able to chain these operations, say, okay, at a glance, I can just read this in English and know what it is, right? Whereas here, I have to make sure, okay, what am I doing my range on? Did the person actually use the correct return value from that? Are they using the index or are they using the name? And I have to sort of cognitively think about that and analyze that just to get my first grasp of what this is supposed to be doing, right? So again, sort of the functional hidden away kind of in methods. You also see this with things like extension methods, where you can tuck a lot of sort of business logic away into this method that really only makes sense existing on that type of thing that you're interacting with. And I find Kotlin is really nice in doing that. It reads well. It feels really, really nice to work with in terms of just reading and understanding the code. At the end of the day, Go still is not bad. It's just very explicit, and you just have to take time to read through and make sure you know what's going on. But at the end of the day, it's not that big a difference. It's just a preference in what you find to be more readable or what I find to be more readable. So that was the first thing that I really started noticing, where I was like, okay, I feel like I like Kotlin more than Go, but why? And so these two things, the error handling and the more functional style approach from Kotlin, is where I started to actualize that feeling of like and dislike. And again, I'm sure that there are functional libraries written in Go. I'm sure you can make it, look more like this. Like obviously we could extract this into a method and say, okay, we're going to give it both the names and we're going to get back this other name, right? So to some extent, like you can do the same thing, and writing readable code is not, it's on the developer to write readable code. The language will not force you to write unreadable code, if I could put it that way. So then my last sort of example, and this is where I really kind of started to like how Kotlin was handling things better, or at least how it would read, is when we get into things like handling JSON. So at first, Go has really nice standard library, just ships with a thing to decode JSON. You have to go a little bit lower level in your code with like handling the bytes from the file and making sure you pass those in. I'm sure there's abstractions written on top of this, but sort of at face value, the standard thing is or what I'm saying here. So to back up a little bit, you can define your structs or your data classes and exactly how you expect the JSON to turn out. And that works very nicely with Go's Marshaling and also with Kotlin's serialization library. So this case, what I wanted to do is I wanted to take two files and I wanted to get the JSON out of it, and I really just needed to analyze the results of two path variables in the JSON. And the JSON has a lot of variables in there. So I just wanted to say, give me back a blob of JSON. So like in Kotlin, I just say, okay, give me a JSON element, and it just represents like this object. And for this case, I know where I'm going with that object and what I want to use it for. It's very specific. It's more like analyzing some data to make sure it is actually the values that we anticipate that it is. So Kotlin, I just say, okay, it's JSON. Again, the error handling, I can say, okay, if I get an error, I want to just print it out and give myself a null. So my type turns out basically the same, right? I can still interact with it all the same. Over in Go, we are returning an error out of this function this time. So we're not just panicking here. And then as we go down to where we use that helper function, you can start to see like now we have three instances of, okay, well, if the error is nil here, do something. If the error is nil here, do something. And so, I can imagine if we are, reading 5 files, the error handling becomes much more verbose than it was with the Kotlin example. So that's where this particular preference really started to settle in for me, is when I was doing something that involved even more handling of errors and making sure, I knew what went wrong when it went wrong. From the Kotlin perspective, I'm just like, hey, I expect this to return me back a normal value, and I know because I implemented it that it'll catch any errors further down the chain and handle them appropriately how I chose to handle them. So there's that part. The other thing is with Go for this, we just have like this generic interface. This is kind of like analogous to the any type, where it's like, this is a thing that's not like, it's not a literal, it's not like a string or an integer or Boolean. It's some object. Like it could be a slice, it could be a map, it could be like a map with a slice inside of it. We don't know. So we're able to just say, okay, it's a thing, read it, and the unmarshal did a good job of just putting it into that generic interface. Then as we go forward, like we can see, okay, I've got this generic interface, right? So now when we actually want to use that to access some value from that, then, yeah, sorry, just blinked. We have to cast that type. So because it's just a generic interface, we have to cast it into the shape that is what we want. And so this is where I started to notice the third thing that I wanted to bring up in this video, which is just the type casting. And it did not feel as clear to me as Kotlin. Some of it could be. I've used Go less than Kotlin, right? But in Kotlin, where I could just say like, okay, my features, they're actually going to always be a JSON array, right? It reads more clearly versus in Go where I have like the dot and then I have parentheses and then I have to make sure I know what's in the parentheses and then I have to make sure I have the curly braces because I still have a generic inside of the map. And then like after I access that thing, I need to recast the next thing. So again, some of this could be solved by like a DSL, a nice DSL for handling unknown JSON in Go. But the thing I wanted to get more at is just the way that you do the typecasting doesn't read as well to me. So when I'm looking through it, I have to spend more effort mentally to understand what we're doing there than I would in an example with Kotlin. Then the last point, so again, like most of this, it's all pretty similar on both sides. Like you're defining stuff, you're iterating, you're looping. For the Go example, I, instead of having these like find sort of generic array operations or that we could do, it like I just had to make my own, right? So this is a great example of where I think Go just lets you do whatever you want. It gives you the building blocks and some really powerful building blocks, and then you have to build like all of it. If you want like a find thing, you have to build the find thing, or you have to find someone else's and bring it in, which is fine too, as long as like you do your research on that, right? So again, here, like I didn't want to have to redo myself on all the typecasting, and at the end of the day, like I just am not finding Go's type system to be as expressive as Kotlin's. So those are my thoughts for today, and I'm happy to hear any feedback, any comments. Always open to learning, and if I come to the realization that Go is far superior to Kotlin, then I can record a new video and admit my errors to the world. But for now, I prefer Kotlin, and these are 3 of the reasons why. The just more expressiveness of the type system, the more expressiveness and readability of having the functional sort of chained operations, especially when working with lists and arrays. And then the third one, which you can take or leave, is the error handling, where I do find myself liking the try catch and the things that you can do with that versus having to explicitly return errors and relying on everybody else to explicitly return their errors instead of swallowing them. Again, like you can swallow errors regardless, so it comes down to making good choices as a developer. But those 3 things are the 3 things that I'm liking about Kotlin more than Go right now. So thanks for watching, and who knows, maybe we'll catch you next time. Maybe I'll talk about testing, because Go was very nice for testing so far.